Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Governor Antoine. And all protocols observed, but really great pleasure, honorable ministers, permanent secretaries, ambassadors, Olympic champion, but we all aspire. It is really a great honor and pleasure to be here. I am economist for the Caribbean for the World Bank. Many of you may know that the World Bank has moved their regional office for the Caribbean into the Caribbean about 3 years ago. Our regional office now is in Kingston, Jamaica. So I have been living in Kingston, Jamaica, yeah man, for the last 3 years. I start to feel Caribbean at heart, but at the same time, we're of course World Bank, working very closely with all of the countries in the region, and what I'm trying to do here is maybe give a little bit of external perspective on how we see the Caribbean in the region and the strategies for sustainable future. And before I get into the presentation, just to be very clear, Caribbean knows how to do tourism. There is not very much that World Bank can teach you on this. We are not really in tourism business. But we want to look at tourism and its role for growth and for resilience, the very important element that Governor have mentioned, and that in the last week, that in the World Bank at least, we have not been sleeping very much. We're preparing for our annual meetings, and there is a lot of uncertainty, so resilience becomes a really, really critical consideration, and that will be kind of one of the themes as I go through my presentation. Now, where do you think this is? Guesses? Great answer, right? Great answer, in Grenada, right. Sorry. Oh, yeah. That's it. Grenada, great answer. Now, there's lots of graphs with lots of bar charts because we in the World Bank like numbers. There is nothing too new about it. It's just a reminder for all of us. Tourism accounts for a large share of GDP in most of the Caribbean countries. For some, it's almost 90%, like Antigua. St. Lucia is very significant, but basically average is about 40%. This is supposed to include indirect impacts, but it's notoriously difficult to measure indirect impacts, so most likely this is on the conservative side. GDP accounts for a large portion of GDP, tourism accounts for a large portion of GDP. When often it is said that, oh, Caribbean, look at Pacific very similar, you will see that actually in most Pacific countries, it's actually a much smaller share. They are more diversified, mostly because of their fishing. They have a lot of ocean around them. Now, big portion of GDP, very large portion of employment, especially once we count as indirect. So everybody knows tourism is very important, and yet, this is a picture not from Eastern Caribbean. Where is this picture, we think? Any guesses? Now, this is Kingston, Jamaica from Port Royal with the cruise ship passing by and the people in Port Royal taking picture of the cruise ship while the cruise shippers taking pictures of the Jamaicans. Now, the point here is tourism is a huge portion of economy, but does it do well for the local economy is the question we wanted to kind of look at and think more about. Does it optimize the benefit for the local economy? Do people value the tourism in the same way that maybe some of the tourism industry values it? In one of the conversations, I heard this told that people in one of the islands think tourism is something that happens outside there. There is this tourism, and then there is us here in the island, even though it's 60% of GDP and 80% of employment. So does it really work? And basically, we have conducted analysis in the World Bank. That's what we do. We write reports. We have done one very recently, just released, on tourism in the Caribbean, trying to really tackle this question. Does the current model that exists for tourism in the region deliver as best as it could, or there could be improvements? So one metric one could think about, and just one metric, is what is the spend per arrival? And here, if we compare Pacific and Caribbean, because that's what people like to do, the spend per arrival is much higher in the Pacific than in the Caribbean. Now, one of the big reasons for it, of course, is because of the dominance of the cruise tourism. Nothing wrong with it. Caribbean is the largest region for cruise worldwide. It has done exceptionally well. But again, just as one of the metrics, it results in the slower per tourist spend, and it has other costs. And I will get to that in a minute, but just kind of like thinking through this and thinking through how did we get into the model that we have in tourism in the Caribbean. All of you know this, but just to recap, 70s and 80s, there was large growth in large-scale tourism, hotels, FDI, building big all-inclusive resorts. 90s and 2000, continuing with big all-inclusive resorts, cruise really picks up, lots of tax incentive to mobilize all of this. Large-scale tourism, cruise, all-inclusive. By 2010, some people started looking at the cost side of it. IMF has done a paper, not us, IMF, where they looked at the tax incentives, and they accounted that the tax incentives were accounting for, 4.4 to 7% of GDP in foregone revenue. Now, maybe it was really worthwhile because it created jobs, it created economic contribution, but maybe it wasn't. But it was a question. And at the same time, the environmental impacts started to be acknowledged. And of course, the climate change and all the impacts that it brings with it. And so by the 2020s where we are, we recognize the costs, we recognize the risks of climate change, then COVID hit. That was a big blow. Some thought tourism will never come back. We, World Bank, had a regional Eastern Caribbean tourism project. It had to be completely restructured because the reality on the ground changed so much from what our thinking was in 2018, 2019 to where we were in 2020, 2021, and worked very closely with the authorities in all the 3 countries that covered the project. So now where we stand, and again, this is what our study was looking at, is does the model that we have right now delivers optimally, or there are things that could be done better? And the way we did it, we looked at 3 segments. There is very elaborate methodology why we chose these 3 segments. I urge you to read the report. But the 3 segments we were looking at are very broad ones, is cruise, accommodation, and adventure tourism. So on the cruise, the issue is this. Again, the amount of revenue that is generated is very much correlated with the amount of time the tourist spends on shore, which is pretty, you don't really need fancy regressions to figure that out, but because we like fancy regressions, we do it. And so the objective there is how do we bring the tourists on shore, and how do we make them spend more money and spend more time on shore? And this is exactly where this adventure, but also authentic experiences and more culture and more local experience that really is an opportunity that could happen. And I think we'll be hearing more about this as we go on later today. So one dimension of it is how to diversify these experiences to keep these cruise arrivals on shore longer. And another dimension is the environmental cost of it. Now, the next slide is going to be maybe a little bit controversial, but remember, we are World Bank. We are from outside, so we can put up numbers like this. Now, some of them may or may not be fully accurate up to date, and we're willing to hear back from all of you about that. But what we were trying to look at is say, okay, remember the question of does the sector bring in as much as it could for everybody in the economy? And one way to look at it is the revenue generated from the sector. And of course, part of it is the per head passenger fees that are collected on the cruise arrivals. Now, this is from the research that we did looking around. We were not able to estimate the total revenue, but we just have the rates, right? And some of them may be dated, some of them may not be fully comparable because different countries charge it in very different ways. But one thought on this was, number one, there is a lot of variation in terms of the fees. And is there an opportunity to act together as a region and think about more harmonized approach? And would that bring better results than the current structure? This is one question to ponder and to kind of look into. Another one is the cost to environment fully incorporated in the rates that are charged right now? Because, for example, all the islands share one Caribbean Sea, and protecting that very rich environment is essential for preserving tourism, but also is very expensive. So maybe there is an opportunity to think about the conservation and preservation of the entire ecosystem, and as a fiscal revenue, and as a joint effort in the region in terms of how the fees collected, and working with the cruise industry, of course, which has been very active in this space, also trying to support it. So this is just one there. Is there an opportunity to bring more revenue and channel that revenue for this conservation, preservation, and greater resilience and sustainability of this important asset, which is nature around the Caribbean? So that's kind of on the cruise. And there is also other ideas, but again, they're in the report, and we will hear much more about culture tourism and indigenous tourism and all of those experiences. Now, on accommodation, the business is doing great all across the board. This is to 2023 numbers, but I understand it continues to be strong, at least in the countries where we have been talking in terms of the pipeline of the projects. This is for the hotels and the room numbers. So this is very good that there is a strong pipeline. At the same time, there is also a question of the resilience and the question of sustainability. As one of the parameters of the sustainability, for example, is the use of water. Some of the islands have really major issues in terms of the water scarcity and the pressures from the tourism industry, and also the cost that we see some of the islands provide very large amount of the bottled water, to what extent this is the best way to go. So some of these dimensions come together in terms of how does one continue working in this sector. And again, the tourism industry has been very actively addressing it, but maybe there is more that can be done. And then, where is this? It's here. And actually, this picture is from 2 years ago. But yesterday, I went out and the excavator was there. Climate change is real. It brings real cost already. Sargassum is just one element of it, which is additional cost. The erosion of the beaches is a real concern. Additional water pressure. So there is this whole question of extra costs coming into the sector and how to address it, which again, large hotels versus small operators have different ways of dealing with it, and this is where the resilience come in. And the opportunity. A very interesting development in the region has been the Airbnb, basically. The number of rooms listed on Airbnb already is exceeding the number of hotel rooms that we have in many of the markets. And potentially that is a huge game changer for the region, because it changes the type of tourists who stays there, and it changes the resilience and all of these aspects, because the nomads probably would be sitting in Airbnb, the digital nomads, sorry, would be sitting in Airbnb. They probably would not be sitting in an all-inclusive large resort. The people who visit Airbnb, they are more keen to participate in local economy, in cultural experience, and all of those things. So I think there's a huge opportunity that is kind of knocking on the door, enabled by technology. And it also provides a resilience in a different manner because it integrates more the local economy. So all in all, with the accommodation, we have kind of three broad buckets that we were thinking about. One is always on the supply of quality labor. Especially after COVID, we have heard it a lot that when the crews started rehiring, the hotels really were suffering. But the pipeline of qualified personnel, but also the skill set, especially if we're going more into this culture, adventure, and more localized tourism experience, other skill sets there. And I think that's one big area to consider. Next one is this opportunity of the short-term rental market and the regulation for it. Trade-offs, how to basically tax that activity, but also how to enable it and how to make sure that it sustainably develops and brings the resilient tourism in. And the third kind of dimension is this again, about this tax incentive versus the small businesses and the right balance. Is this now the optimal mix, or can one do more for one or the other, and what would make sense? So the three buckets kind of that we're looking at on accommodation. And then last but not least, we were looking at this opportunity as an adventure. Adventure is 30% of all global leisure travel, but then we see that for the Caribbean, it's only 20% of the US arrivals who do adventure in the Caribbean. When asked to rank the destinations for adventure tourism, Caribbean was not scoring very high. Now, these are all just some of the numbers, but they indicate something, which I think is a great opportunity for adventure. Adventure in the Caribbean is real. This is here. This is in St. Kitts, and the shark is here. I took a picture of it. There is a lot of opportunity, again, around the marine, but also the onshore hikes, mountains, zip lines, and all of those things. And already, many of the islands are actually having substantial portion of their travel in adventure. Dominica is a champion. St. Vincent, this is, I think, sailing primarily, is also really big. But I think in other markets, there is a lot more opportunity as well for adventure, which is a high value, localized, and potentially much more inclusive in a manner of economic benefit for the local society. And so here we kind of were looking again at what are the solutions, pathways, right? One was relating to a variety of regulations because it's adventure. There are different permits that you have to receive, perhaps from different agencies. So thinking strategically around the third bucket, which is what is the product for tourism? Thinking about the regulatory base for it and making it, enabling it, but in a safe manner, because then otherwise it's adventure, so insurance cost is also the dimension to consider, but big opportunity there. And the third area is this protected area management. And that, again, touches a little bit on what I was talking about, is are we, in a very blunt way, charging enough tourists when they're coming here to generate enough revenue to invest in the destinations, to invest in the protection of the environment, and to develop the destination so they can be enjoyed in a more sustainable and resilient manner. So that's kind of where we were landing on the adventure. And that's about it. I'm gonna stop talking and hand it over to more exciting speakers, but this is the report that I was mentioning, Rethinking Caribbean Tourism. We have much more data in there. It's on the World Bank website. And you can connect with us, you know where we are. And if you're ever in Jamaica, we are there. But sometimes we're traveling around the islands, and we'll see you there too. Thank you so much for listening.
I want to give you the opportunity. She just spoke of opportunity.